$2. She's mine.
The woman on the auction block wore a burlap sack over her head wrists, bound with rope that had worn her skin raw. Men laughed. Women whispered. But when she spoke her name, just 2 words barely audible, one man in the back went pale as death itself. Because Silas Boon recognized that voice.
You don't know
It was the voice that had saved his life 3 winters ago, in a blizzard he shouldn't have survived. And now she stood there, sold like livestock, waiting for someone to see her as human. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the end of this story.
Everything from her.
Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. Now, let's step back to where it all started.
You're home now.
The auction stage stank of wet wood and desperation. Silas Boon stood at the back of the crowd, hat pulled low, trying to disappear into the wall of shoulders and sweat. He'd come to town for nails and coffee, not for this, not for the spectacle that had drawn half of Timber Falls to the muddy square like flies to carrion. Lot 17, the auctioneer bellowed, voice cracking with theatrical enthusiasm. One female, approximately 25 years, able-bodied, literate. What's with the sack? Someone yelled. Laughter rippled through the crowd, cruel and easy. The auctioneer grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. Well, now that's part of the mystery, ain't it, buyer's risk, gentlemen? Could be a beauty underneath. Could be why she's wearing it. More laughter. A woman near the front clutched her shawl tighter and whispered something to her husband, who shook his head in disgust. Silas felt his jaw tighten. He'd seen auctions before. This was Oregon Territory in 1869, after all, where debt could turn a person into property faster than a forest fire could turn timber into ash. But something about this felt different, felt wrong in a way that made his chest ache. The woman on the stage stood perfectly still. The burlap sack hung to her shoulders, tied loosely at her neck. Her dress was gray wool patched at the elbows, hem-caked with mud. Her hands were bound in front of her, not tight enough to cut circulation, but tight enough to make a point. She didn't struggle, didn't plead. She just stood there like she'd already left her body, like she was watching from somewhere far away. Starting bid, gentlemen. Do I hear $5? Silence. 4? Nothing. The auctioneer's smile faltered. Come now, she can cook clean so. Can she talk? Someone shouted. Or is that why she's got the sack on mute? She talks. The auctioneer snapped. Don't you girl tell the nice people you can talk. The woman's shoulders rose slightly, then fell. She said nothing. $3? The auctioneer tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. $3 for a working woman, literate, no known disease. What's her crime? A man called out. Nobody sells a woman like this without reason. The auctioneer hesitated. Just for a moment, but Silas caught it. Debts, the auctioneer said finally. Employer died, debts transferred. It's all legal. I got the papers. That ain't the whole story. The voice came from an older woman near the stage, thin as a rail with eyes like chips of flint. That girl was accused of murder. Killed her employer in cold blood, some say. Others say it was self-defense. Either way, the law couldn't prove nothing, so they sold her instead. The crowd shifted. Some stepped back. Others leaned forward, interest renewed for all the wrong reasons. Silas felt something twist in his gut. $2, the auctioneer said quickly, trying to regain control. $2, and she's yours. No questions asked. I'll give you 50 cents. A man near the front said, grinning. For the novelty. $1, another offered. If she can actually cook. The woman on the stage still hadn't moved. But Silas saw her hands, saw the way her fingers had curled into fists so tight, her knuckles showed white through the rope. $2, the auctioneer repeated. Final offer, gentlemen, or she goes back to the county work farm. What's her name? Silas heard himself say. The crowd parted slightly, heads turning to see who'd spoken. Silas kept his eyes on the stage, on the woman in the sack, on the way she'd gone, completely still at the sound of his voice. The auctioneer squinted at him. You bidding? I'm asking her name. What's it matter? It matters. The auctioneer looked annoyed, but he turned to the woman. Tell the man your name. Nothing. Girl, I said tell him you're Annabel. The voice was barely a whisper, muffled by the burlap. Annabel Crowe. The world tilted. Silas felt the blood drain from his face, felt his hands go numb, felt every sound in the square fade to a dull roar. Because he knew that voice. He'd heard it once before 3 years ago, in the worst storm he'd ever survived. Pine bark tea bitter on his tongue. Gentle hands packing snow around his frost-bitten feet. A voice in the darkness, low and steady. Stay awake. Just a little longer. Stay with me. He'd never seen her face. The cave had been too dark, the storm too fierce. When he'd woken at dawn, she was gone. Nothing left but a blanket that wasn't his, and tracks leading into the white. He'd searched for weeks, asked everyone in 3 counties. Nobody knew anything about a woman alone in the mountains during the worst blizzard in 20 years. And now she stood on an auction block, nameless and faceless, waiting to be sold for $2. I'll take her, Silas said. The auctioneer brightened. $2? $2. Sold. The auctioneer brought his hammer down with a crack that echoed off the buildings. Lot 17 to the gentleman in the back. Silas pushed through the crowd, ignoring the looks, the whispers, the way people stepped aside like he carried something contagious. He climbed the steps to the stage, pulled $2 coins from his pocket, and dropped them into the auctioneer's palm. She's all yours, the auctioneer said, already moving to the next lot. Papers are inside. Get 'em before you leave town. Silas turned to Annabel. Up close, he could see the burlap wasn't just rough. It was old-stained, the kind of sack that had held grain or flour before being repurposed for this. There were small holes near the bottom where moths had eaten through. Can you walk? He asked quietly. She nodded once. Then walk with me. He didn't reach for her, didn't touch her, just turned and headed down the steps, trusting she'd follow. She did. They walked through the crowd in silence. People stared. A few muttered things Silas didn't bother listening to. One man spat on the ground as they passed. Silas kept walking. At the edge of the square, a woman's voice rang out. You know what you bought, mister? Silas stopped, turned. The old woman from before stood with her arms crossed, jaw set. I know what I paid, Silas said. She killed a man. So the story goes. You believe different. Silas glanced at Annabel, standing 2 steps behind him. Head down, shoulders hunched under the weight of the sack and everything it represented. I believe, Silas said slowly, that a man who buys another human being for $2 doesn't get to ask too many questions about their past. We've all got ghosts. The old woman studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Fair enough, but don't say nobody warned you. Noted. They walked 3 more blocks in silence, past the general store, past the saloon, past the church with its white steeple, pointing accusingly at the sky. Silas's horse, a bay mare named Rust, stood tied outside the land office where he'd left her. Can you ride? Silas asked. Annabel nodded. He untied Rust, checked the saddle, then held out his hand. Annabel stared at it for a moment. He could feel her looking even through the burlap, then reached out and let him help her mount. The rope around her wrists made it clumsy, but she managed. Silas pulled a knife from his belt. Annabel went rigid. Easy, Silas said. Just the rope. He cut through the bindings with 2 quick strokes, then tucked the knife away. Annabel brought her hands up slowly, rubbing at the raw skin underneath. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. He swung up behind her, took the reins, and guided Russ toward the road that led out of town and into the mountains beyond. They rode for 2 hours without speaking. The road climbed steadily into pine country, where the air grew sharp and clean, and the only sounds were hoofbeats and wind through branches. Spring had come late this year. Patches of snow still clung to the north-facing slopes, and the rivers ran fast and cold with melt. Silas's cabin sat in a clearing halfway up the ridge built from logs he'd cut himself chinked with mud and moss. Smoke curled from the stone chimney. The roof needed patching, but it was solid enough. A shed stood nearby, along with a woodpile that would last through next winter if he was careful. He pulled Russ to a stop in front of the cabin and dismounted, then offered his hand again. Annabel took it this time without hesitation. "Inside," Silas said. "I'll tend to the horse." She climbed the steps, slowly opened the door, and disappeared into the dim interior. Silas led Russ to the shed, unsaddled her, rubbed her down, and gave her grain and water. Then he stood there for a minute, hands on the stall door, trying to make sense of what he'd just done. He'd bought a woman at an auction. Not hired, not helped, bought. The thought made his stomach turn. But the alternative, letting her go back to that work farm, or worse, to whoever had put her in that sack in the first place, that was worse. And her voice. God, her voice. "Stay with me." He'd heard those words in the cave 3 years ago, when his body had been too cold to shiver, and his mind had been drifting toward the kind of sleep you don't wake from. She'd kept him talking, kept him breathing, kept him alive through the longest night of his life. And then she'd vanished like smoke. Now she was here, in his cabin, wearing the same voice, and a sack over her head, and a past that ended with an accusation of murder. Silas took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and walked back to the cabin. Inside, Annabel stood in the middle of the room, hands clasped in front of her, head down. She hadn't moved since entering, hadn't touched anything, just stood there like she was waiting for permission to exist. Silas closed the door gently. "You can sit." She didn't move. "There's a chair," he said, pointing to the table. "You can sit." Slowly, carefully, she crossed to the chair and lowered herself into it. Her movements were precise, controlled, like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. Silas moved to the stove, stoked the fire, and put a kettle on. "Coffee?" No answer. "I've got coffee or water, or I can make tea if you'd rather." "Water's fine." He poured water into a tin cup and set it on the table in front of her. She reached for it with both hands, brought it to the edge of the sack where her mouth must be, and drank. He could hear her swallow, could see her shoulders relax just slightly. "You hungry?" he asked. A pause. Then, "Yes." He nodded and started pulling things from the shelves: cornmeal, salt pork, dried beans. "I'm not much of a cook, but I can make something that'll fill you up." "I can cook." "I know." The words hung in the air between them. Annabel set the cup down slowly. "How do you know?" Silas kept his hands busy measuring cornmeal into a bowl. "You told me once, 3 years ago, in a cave during a blizzard." Silence. Then, "That was you." "That was me." "You were half dead." "Mostly dead," Silas agreed. "You pulled me back." "I didn't." She stopped, started again. "I didn't know if you'd remember." "I remember everything." He mixed water into the cornmeal, working it into a rough dough. "I looked for you. After. Asked everyone from here to the coast. Nobody knew anything about a woman in the mountains that night. I didn't want to be found." "Why?" Another long silence. Silas shaped the cornmeal into cakes and set them in the pan. The smell of hot grease filled the cabin. "Because," Annabel said finally, voice barely above a whisper, "people who get found usually wish they'd stayed hidden." Silas felt something crack open in his chest. He flipped the cakes, keeping his eyes on the pan. "You're safe here." "You don't know that." "I know I'm not going to hurt you, and I know anyone who tries to come through that door will regret it." "You don't know me." "I know you saved my life when you didn't have to. I know you're still alive after God knows what, which means you're a survivor. And I know—" He stopped, turned to look at her, at the sack, at the way her hands gripped the edge of the table like she might fall through the floor. "I know you deserve better than being sold on a stage for $2. Maybe I don't. That's not your decision to make." Her head came up slightly. "Then whose is it?" "Mine. I paid for you. That means you're my responsibility now." I'm not—" Her voice broke. "I'm not property." "No," Silas said quietly. "You're not, which is why I'm telling you right now, you can leave whenever you want. I'm not keeping you here. I'm just offering a roof and food until you figure out what comes next." She went very still. "Why?" "Because I owe you." "You don't." "I do." He pulled the cornmeal cakes from the pan, divided them onto 2 plates, added salt pork. "And because I've been alone on this mountain for 3 years and I'm tired of talking to myself." He set one plate in front of her, took the other to the far side of the table, and sat down. They ate in silence. Annabel lifted the bottom of the sack just enough to bring food to her mouth, then let it drop again. Silas pretended not to watch, pretended not to notice the way her hands shook, pretended not to see the way she kept her head angled away from him, even with the sack on. When the plates were empty, Silas stood and collected them. "There's a bed in the back room. It's yours. I'll sleep out here." "You don't have to. I'm not asking." He washed the plates in the basin, dried them, stacked them on the shelf. When he turned back, Annabel was still sitting at the table, hands folded in her lap. "One question," Silas said. She tensed. "When you said your name today at the auction, did you know I'd recognize your voice?" A long pause. Then so quietly, he almost missed it. "I hoped." Something in his chest tightened. "Why didn't you say something? 3 years ago, why didn't you tell me your name?" "Because names make you real, and real people can be found." She stood slowly, unsteadily, like her legs weren't sure they'd hold her. "I'll take the bed. Thank you." She crossed to the back room and closed the door behind her. Silas stood alone in the firelight, listening to the soft creak of the bed frame, the sound of someone trying not to cry. He poured himself coffee and sat in the chair by the stove, rifle across his lap, and stared at the door. Because he'd meant what he said, anyone who tried to come through that door would regret it. But what he hadn't said, what he couldn't say yet, was that somewhere between the auction block and this moment, he'd stopped seeing Annabel Crowe as a debt to repay, and started seeing her as someone worth protecting for her own sake. Even if she never took the sack off, even if she never told him what had really happened, even if the thought stopped him cold, even if she did kill that man. Because the truth was, Silas didn't care. Not really. He'd seen enough of the world to know that survival sometimes meant doing things you couldn't take back, meant making choices between bad and worse, meant living with ghosts that never quite left you alone. He'd made those choices himself, more than once. So if Annabel Crowe had killed a man to stay alive, to stay free, to keep breathing for one more day, well, Silas Boon wasn't the kind to cast stones. He drained his coffee, banked the fire, and settled into the chair for the night. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and sending pine needles skittering across the roof. Inside, 2 people who'd saved each other's lives without knowing it tried to figure out what came next. And somewhere in the dark, the past waited patiently for its moment to come knocking. Dawn came cold and gray, slipping through the gaps in the shutters like an unwelcome guest. Silas woke with his neck stiff from the chair rifle still across his lap, fire reduced to embers. He stood slowly, working the kinks out of his shoulders, and moved to the stove. The door to the back room was still closed. He built up the fire, put coffee on, and tried not to think about the fact that there was another person in his cabin. A woman, with a burlap sack over her head and a voice that had pulled him back from the edge of forever. The coffee was just starting to boil when he heard movement behind the door. A pause. Then the latch lifted, and Annabel emerged, still wearing the sack, still wearing yesterday's dress. "Morning," Silas said, keeping his voice neutral. She nodded, but didn't speak. "Coffee's almost ready. You want some?" Another nod. He poured 2 cups, set one on the table for her, took his own to the window. Outside, mist hung low in the pines. A doe picked her way across the clearing, ears alert. "Did you sleep?" Annabel asked. "Some." "You didn't have to stay out here all night." "Wanted to." She picked up the coffee cup with both hands, tilted the sack just enough to drink. I'm not going to run. Didn't think you would. Then why the rifle? Silas turned to look at her. Even through the burlap, he could feel her watching him. Because the world's full of men who think $2 buys more than it does, and I'd rather be ready than sorry. She set the cup down carefully. You really think someone would come? Don't know, but I've learned not to bet against trouble. They drank in silence. The cabin settled around them, wood creaking, fire popping. Outside, the doe moved on, disappearing into the mist like she'd never been there at all. I need to ask you something, Silas said finally. Annabel's shoulders tensed. All right. The sack. You planning to keep it on? A long pause. Does it bother you? No. But I need to know if you're wearing it because you want to, or because someone made you. Both, she said quietly. At first they made me. Said I was too horrible to look at. Said decent people shouldn't have to see what I'd become. But after a while, she stopped, hands tightening around the cup. After a while it felt safer. Like, as long as they couldn't see me, they couldn't really hurt me. Does that make sense? Yeah, Silas said. It does. So to answer your question, I'll take it off when I'm ready, not before. Fair enough. He finished his coffee, set the cup aside, and reached for his coat. I've got work to do. Trees to cut, wood to split. You can stay here or you can come with me. Your choice. I'll come. He glanced at her. You sure? I've been in small rooms for a long time. I'd like to see the sky. Something in her voice made his throat tight. He nodded once and held the door open. They stepped out into the morning. The mist was lifting now, burning off in patches where sunlight managed to break through the clouds. The air smelled like pine and wet earth, and the promise of spring finally taking hold. Annabel stood on the porch for a long moment, face tilted up toward the light. Silas watched her breathe, watched her hands unclench, watched her whole body seem to expand just slightly, like she was remembering how to take up space. Come on, he said gently. I'll show you around. He led her past the shed, where rust nickered a greeting past the woodpile that needed splitting down a narrow path that wound through the trees. The ground was soft with pine needles and last year's leaves. Birds called overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a creek ran fast and loud with snowmelt. This is my territory, Silas said as they walked. About 40 acres, give or take. I cut timber, sell it in town twice a month. It's not much, but it keeps me fed. You do it alone. Yeah. That's hard work for one person. I manage. They came to a clearing where several trees had been marked with chalk-straight pines, tall and thick, ready to come down. Silas's crosscut saw hung from a branch nearby, along with wedges and an axe. How long have you been up here? Annabel asked. 3 years, give or take. Since the cave. Since the cave. She turned toward him, and even through the sack he could feel her studying him. What were you doing out there that night in the storm? Silas picked up the axe, tested its weight. Running. From what? Everything. He moved to the nearest marked tree, checked the angle, adjusted his stance. Had a wife before, Sarah. She died in childbirth, baby too. I couldn't. The words stuck. He swallowed hard. Couldn't stay in the house after that. Couldn't look at her things. Couldn't breathe. So I left. Went into the mountains with no plan, no sense, just went. Storm caught me 2 days in. Would have died if you hadn't found me. I'm sorry, Annabel said softly. About your wife. Me too. He swung the axe. The blade bit deep into the trunk, sending chips flying. He pulled it free and swung again. And again. The rhythm felt good. Honest. The kind of work that let your mind go quiet. Annabel moved closer, watching. You loved her. More than anything. Do you still? The axe paused mid-swing. Silas lowered it slowly, breathing hard. Yeah, I do. But it's different now. Less like drowning, more like... He searched for the word. More like carrying something heavy that you've learned how to hold. I understand that, Annabel said. Carrying something heavy. I figured you might. He went back to work. The tree groaned, shifted, started to lean. Silas stepped back, called timber, and watched it fall with a crash that sent birds scattering from the surrounding branches. You're good at that, Annabel said. I've had practice. Could you teach me? He looked at her. You want to learn to cut timber. I want to learn to do something useful, something that isn't cooking or cleaning or... She stopped. Something that matters. Silas nodded slowly. All right, but not today. Today you watch, learn the rhythm, see how it works. Tomorrow, if you still want to, I'll put an axe in your hands. Tomorrow, she agreed. They worked through the morning, Silas cutting Annabel, watching, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just standing in the dappled sunlight with her face turned toward the sound of the creek. When the sun was high and his shirt was soaked with sweat, Silas finally stopped and wiped his face with his sleeve. You hungry? He asked. Starving. They walked back to the cabin together. This time Annabel didn't walk behind him. She walked beside him, matching his pace, her steps growing more confident with each yard. Inside, Silas washed his hands and face, while Annabel moved to the shelves. Can I? She asked, gesturing toward the food stores. You don't have to ask. I want to. Then yes, help yourself. She pulled down flour-dried apples, a jar of honey. Her movements were quick, efficient, the kind that came from years of practice. Within minutes, she had dough rising by the fire and apples stewing in a pot. Where'd you learn to cook? Silas asked. My mother. She worked in a big house outside Portland, taught me everything she knew before she died. How old were you? 12. That's young to lose a mother. It's young to lose anyone you love. She stirred the apples, tasted them, added more honey. After she died, I stayed on at the house, worked in the kitchen, then worked my way up to household management. Thought I had a future there. Thought... Her voice went hard. Thought wrong. Silas leaned against the wall, arms crossed. The man who died. Your employer. She stopped stirring. Yes. You don't have to tell me. I know. But she didn't say anything else. Just went back to cooking, shoulders tight, movements a little too careful. Silas let it go. Whatever had happened, she'd tell him when she was ready. Or she wouldn't. Either way, it didn't change what he'd decided back in town. She was here now. She was safe. That was enough. They ate bread and stewed apples at the table, passing a jar of water back and forth. The food was better than anything Silas had made in 3 years. He told her so. It's just apples and bread, she said. But he could hear the pleasure in her voice. Still good. After she cleared the plates without being asked, washed them, dried them, put them away. When she finished, she stood at the basin for a moment, hands braced on the edge. What is it? Silas asked. I'm trying to remember the last time someone let me do something without telling me I was doing it wrong. You're not doing it wrong. You don't know that yet. I know enough. She turned toward him, and he saw her hands were shaking. Why are you being kind to me? The question hit him harder than he expected. Because someone was kind to me once when I needed it most. And because you deserve it. You don't know what I've done. Don't care. You should. Maybe, Silas said, but I don't. She stood there for a long moment, trembling, and then she whispered, I killed him. The words fell between them like stones into deep water. Silas didn't move, didn't react, just waited. He came into my room, Annabel continued, voice shaking now, words spilling out like she'd been holding them back too long. Late at night, said his wife was asleep, said no one would know, said I owed him for room and board. I said no. He didn't care. He grabbed me. I pushed him away. He fell. hit his head on the stove. There was so much blood, and he wasn't moving, and I couldn't think. She was breathing too fast now, hands clutching at the sack, like she might tear it off or disappear inside it. Silas couldn't tell which. "I ran," she gasped. "I ran to the neighbors, told them what happened. They came back with me, and he was still there, still not moving, and his wife was screaming, saying I'd murdered him, saying I'd seduced him and killed him when he refused me. The sheriff came. They said they found things in my room. Letters I'd supposedly written. Things I'd supposedly stolen. All lies, but who believes a servant over a widow? So they locked me up. Said I'd hang. Then the widow said she'd be merciful. Said she'd sell me instead, to pay his debts. So they did." She stopped, chest heaving, and Silas realized she was crying behind the sack. He could hear it in her breath, see it in the way her whole body shook. He stood slowly and crossed to her, stopped an arm's length away. "Annabel." "Don't," she choked out. "Don't tell me it's all right. Don't tell me I did what I had to do. Don't." "I was going to say thank you." She went still. "What?" "Thank you for telling me. I know that wasn't easy." "That's it. That's all you have to say." "What else is there?" Silas asked quietly. "You defended yourself. Man got what he deserved. End of story." But nothing. You're alive. He's not. I call that justice." "The law doesn't. The law's a pack of fools who wouldn't know justice if it bit them." He stepped closer, careful not to touch her, just close enough that she could feel he was there. "Listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong. You hear me? Nothing." "I don't know if I believe that." "You don't have to. Not yet. But I do. And I'm going to keep believing it until you figure it out for yourself." She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob, he couldn't tell. "You're a strange man, Silas Boon." "Been called worse." They stood there in the quiet cabin, two people carrying weight they hadn't asked for, trying to figure out how to set it down. Finally, Annabel straightened, wiped at her face under the sack, and took a shaky breath. I need some air." "Go on then." She moved past him to the door, paused with her hand on the latch. "Silas." "Yeah. Thank you. For listening, for not—" She stopped. "Just thank you." Then she was gone out into the afternoon, leaving him alone with the dishes and the fire and the echo of her confession. Silas stood there for a minute, then let out a long breath and scrubbed his hands over his face. His wife Sarah used to say he had a talent for finding broken things and trying to fix them. Injured birds, lame horses, people the world had given up on. "You can't save everyone," she'd told him once, amused and exasperated in equal measure. "Don't want to save everyone," he'd replied. "Just the ones worth saving." And Annabel Crowe was worth saving. He'd known it the moment she'd spoken her name on that auction block. Known it the way you know a storm's coming, or winter's breaking something deep in your bones that doesn't need proof. She'd saved him once. Now it was his turn. He just had to figure out how to save someone who'd been taught that being saved meant disappearing. Outside, Annabel stood at the edge of the clearing, arms wrapped around herself, staring up at the sky. Silas watched her through the window for a moment, then turned away and started planning dinner. Because sometimes the best way to help someone was just to be there. To make food. To keep the fire going. To prove that not everyone would hurt them. The afternoon stretched into evening. Silas chopped more wood while Annabel walked the property, touching trees, listening to the creek, learning the shape of her new world. When the light started failing, she came back, and they cooked together, him at the stove, her at the table, working in a rhythm they were still learning. They ate by firelight, talked a little, fell quiet a lot. And when the plates were clean and the fire was banked, Annabel stood and moved toward the back room. "Good night," she said. "Good night." The door closed. Silas settled into his chair by the stove rifle across his lap and listened to the cabin creak and settle around him. Day 2, he thought. We both survived day 2. It wasn't much, but it was something. And sometimes something was all you needed to keep going. 3 days passed like that. Silas working Annabel, watching both of them learning how to exist in the same space without words, having to fill every silence. On the 4th morning, Annabel came out of the back room earlier than usual and found Silas already dressed, coffee-made bread and cheese laid out for breakfast. "Today?" she asked. He knew what she meant. Today. They ate quickly, then headed out to the cutting site. The air was crisp, the sky brilliant blue, the kind of morning that made you believe in second chances. Silas picked up a smaller axe, tested its balance, then held it out to her. "You sure about this?" "I'm sure." "Then listen close. This isn't like cooking. You make a mistake with an axe, it'll punish you for it." "I understand." "Do you—" He moved closer, still holding the axe. "Because I need to know you're serious. This isn't about proving something. It's about survival. About knowing you can take care of yourself if something happens to me." She tilted her head, and he could almost see her frowning beneath the sack. "You planning on something happening to you?" "Not planning, but I lived 3 years on this mountain alone. Now there's 2 of us. That changes things. Means we both need to be strong." "I am strong." "I know, but there's different kinds of strong. This is the kind that comes from your back and your hands and your will to not give up when everything hurts." "Then teach me," she said firmly. "I want to learn." He handed her the axe. Her hands closed around the handle, testing the weight. She adjusted her grip, lifted it, lowered it again. "Good," Silas said. "Now watch me first." He demonstrated the stance, the swing, the follow-through. Showed her how to read the wood, where to aim, how to let the weight of the blade do most of the work. Then he stepped back and gestured to a fallen log. "Your turn." Annabel approached the log slowly, positioning herself the way he'd shown. She raised the axe, hesitated, then brought it down. The blade glanced off, barely making a dent. "Again," Silas said. She swung again, and again, each time getting a little more force, a little more accuracy. Sweat darkened the burlap around her neck. Her breathing got harder, but she didn't stop. "That's it," Silas encouraged. "Feel the rhythm. Let the tool work with you, not against you." She swung for 20 minutes straight before her arms started shaking. Finally, she lowered the axe and stepped back, chest heaving. "How was that?" she asked between breaths. "Terrible?" Silas said honestly. "But you didn't quit. That's what matters." "I want to be good at it." "You will be. Takes time." They worked until midday, Annabel swinging the axe until her hands blistered, Silas watching, correcting, encouraging. When they finally stopped, she was shaking with exhaustion, but there was something different in the way she held herself. Something straighter. Prouder. "Tomorrow we do it again," she said. "Tomorrow we do it again." He agreed. That night after dinner, Annabel didn't retreat to the back room right away. Instead, she sat by the fire, hands outstretched toward the warmth, and said quietly, "I used to dream about having a place like this. Yeah. When I was little, before my mother died. She'd tell me stories about women who lived in the mountains away from towns and people and rules. Women who didn't need anyone to survive. I thought she was making it up. She wasn't. I know that now." Annabel flexed her blistered hands. "It hurts." "It'll hurt worse tomorrow." "Good." Silas glanced at her. "Good. Pain means I'm doing something real. Means I'm building something that belongs to me." He understood that, more than he could say, so he just nodded and added another log to the fire. They sat in comfortable silence until Annabel finally stood, said goodnight, and disappeared into the back room. Silas stayed up a while longer, thinking about strength and survival and the strange way life had of bringing people together exactly when they needed each other most. Outside, an owl called. The wind picked up. And somewhere down in the valley in the town he'd left behind, the world kept turning without them. But up here on this mountain, two broken people were slowly learning how to be whole again. One day at a time, one swing of the axe at a time, one quiet morning at a time. And for now, that was enough. 2 weeks became 3, then 4. Spring settled into the mountain with tentative warmth, coaxing wildflowers from the thawing ground and filling the mornings with birdsong. Annabel's hands grew calloused from the axe work, her arms stronger, her swing more confident. She still wore the sack, but something about her had changed. She moved through the world differently now, like she was remembering how to claim space instead of apologizing for occupying it. Silas noticed. He noticed everything about her, though he tried not to. The way she hummed sometimes while cooking. The way she'd pause at the cabin door each morning, breathing deep before stepping outside. The way her laugh when it finally came sounded rusty from disuse, but genuine all the same. They'd fallen into a rhythm, the two of them. Working together during the day, eating together at night, sharing the silence that came easy between people who understood each other's ghosts. It felt almost normal, almost like the life Silas had stopped believing he deserved after Sarah died. Then one morning in late May, everything shifted. Silas woke to find Annabel already up, standing at the window with her arms wrapped tight around herself. Something about her posture made his chest tighten. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting up. "There's someone coming." He was on his feet in seconds, reaching for his rifle. "Where?" "Down the trail. I saw them from the window maybe 5 minutes ago, riding slow, like they're looking for something." Silas moved to the window, careful to stay out of sight. Sure enough, a figure on horseback was picking their way up the mountain path. Too far to make out details, but close enough to be a problem. "Get in the back room," he said quietly. "No." "Annabel." "No." Her voice was firm. "I'm not hiding anymore." "This isn't about hiding. It's about being smart." "Then I'll be smart right here." She moved away from the window, picked up the smaller axe they'd been using for kindling, and held it loose at her side. "If they're looking for me, running won't help. If they're not, I've got nothing to fear. Either way, I stay." Silas wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the back room and face whoever was coming alone. But the look of her standing there with an axe in her hand and her chin up despite the sack made him realize she was right. She wasn't the same woman he'd bought on that auction block. She'd earned the right to face her demons standing up. "All right," he said, "but stay behind me. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" "Understood." They waited. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer, until finally the rider emerged from the tree line into the clearing. Silas's hand tightened on the rifle, then relaxed slightly. It was a woman. Older, thin as a willow switch, riding a paint horse that had seen better days. She wore a plain brown dress and a bonnet that had faded to gray. When she spotted the cabin, she pulled her horse to a stop and called out, "Hello, the house." Silas opened the door, halfway, rifle visible but not aimed. "That's far enough? State your business." The woman raised both hands, showing them empty. "I mean no harm. I'm looking for someone. A woman named Annabel Crowe. I heard she might be up this way." Behind him, Silas felt Annabel go rigid. He didn't turn around, kept his eyes on the visitor. "Who's asking?" "My name's Mavis Green. I worked in the same house as Annabel before everything happened. I need to talk to her. It's important." "She's not here." "I think she is." Mavis's voice was gentle but insistent. "And I think if she hears what I have to say, she'll want to listen." Silas hesitated. Everything in him screamed to send this woman away to protect Annabel from whatever fresh hell might be riding up his mountain. But Annabel's hand touched his shoulder, light as breath. "Let her come," she said quietly. "I know her. She was kind to me." "You sure?" "No, but I want to hear what she has to say." Silas studied Mavis for another long moment, then lowered the rifle and stepped aside. "Tie your horse and come in. But I'm warning you now, you make one move, I don't like one word that hurts her, and you'll wish you'd stayed in town." Mavis nodded slowly. Fair enough. She dismounted, tied her horse to the porch rail, and climbed the steps with the careful movements of someone whose bones ached in the cold. Up close, Silas could see she was older than he'd first thought, 60 maybe, with deep lines around her eyes and mouth. But those eyes were sharp and kind, and when she saw Annabel standing in the cabin with the sack still on, something like grief crossed her face. "Oh, honey," Mavis breathed. "They made you wear that all this time." Annabel's hands tightened on the axe handle. "What do you want, Mavis?" "To tell you the truth. The whole truth, not the lies that got told in court." Mavis looked at Silas. "May I sit? It's been a long ride." "Sit," Silas said curtly, gesturing to the table. "But talk fast." Mavis lowered herself into a chair with a sigh. Annabel stayed standing, axe still in hand, while Silas positioned himself between them, rifle across his lap. "I should have spoken up sooner." Mavis began, hands folded on the table. "Should have gone to the sheriff the day it happened. But I was scared. Mrs. Whitmore, the widow, she had power in that town. Money, connections. And I was just a kitchen woman with no family. I thought if I spoke up she'd destroy me the way she destroyed you." "She didn't destroy me," Annabel said quietly. "She tried, but I'm still here." "Yes, you are." Mavis smiled, sad and proud at once. "Stronger than any of us gave you credit for. But that's beside the point. The point is, I know what really happened that night. I was in the pantry counting supplies when I heard you screaming. I came out just in time to see Mr. Whitmore grab you, see you push him away, see him fall. It was an accident, self-defense. Everything you said was true." The cabin went very quiet. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. "You saw," Annabel whispered. "You saw, and you said nothing." "I know, and I've regretted it every day since." Mavis's voice cracked. "But I'm here now. I'm ready to testify. Ready to tell the sheriff, the judge, anyone who'll listen. I've got it all written down, signed and witnessed. You were defending yourself. That man got exactly what he deserved for putting his hands where they didn't belong." Annabel swayed slightly. Silas was on his feet in an instant, steadying her, guiding her to a chair. She sank into it, axe clattering to the floor. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come forward now?" "Because I couldn't live with myself anymore. Because my conscience was eating me alive. And because—" Mavis pulled a folded paper from her pocket and set it on the table. "Because Mrs. Whitmore died 3 weeks ago. Heart gave out. With her gone, I'm not afraid anymore. No one can hurt me for telling the truth." Silas picked up the paper, unfolded. It read quickly. It was exactly what Mavis claimed, a detailed account of what had happened that night, witnessed by a notary in town. "This is real?" he asked. "Every word?" He looked at Annabel. She was shaking both hands, pressed flat on the table like she was trying to hold herself together. "Annabel," he said gently. "I don't know what to do with this," she whispered. I've been guilty for so long. I don't know how to be anything else." Mavis reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her. "You were never guilty, honey. Never. The only crime you committed was surviving, and that ain't a crime at all. The law might see it different. Then we make the law see it right." Mavis's voice turned fierce. "I didn't ride all the way up this mountain to let you keep carrying shame that never belonged to you. We take this to the sheriff. We clear your name. We make sure everyone knows the truth. And if they don't believe you, they will. I've got no reason to lie, and I've got a reputation in that town as someone who keeps her word." Mavis sat back. "But I won't force you. This is your choice, Annabel. You want to stay hidden up here, I'll understand. But you deserve better than hiding. You deserve to walk into town with your head high and your name clean." The silence stretched. Silas watched Annabel struggle with it, saw the war playing out behind the burlap, fear against hope, safety against freedom, the known darkness against the terrifying possibility of light. Finally, she looked up at Silas. "What do you think?" "I think," he said carefully, "that you've been running from ghosts long enough. I think Mavis is offering you something you might never get again, a chance to stop running. But I also think it's your decision, not mine. Whatever you choose, I'm with you. Even if I choose to stay here to keep hiding. Even then," she turned to Mavis, "if we do this, if we go back to town and tell the truth, what happens to me? Best case, they reopen the case, hear my testimony and clear you. Worst case, they don't believe me and nothing changes. But at least you'll know you tried. At least the truth will be on record. And if they arrest me—" "They won't," Mavis said firmly. "Mrs. Whitmore was the only one pushing for your punishment. With her gone and my testimony on record, they've got no case. You're not a criminal, Annabel. You never were." Annabel stood slowly and walked to the window. Silas watched her stare out at the mountains, at the trees, at the sky that had become her whole world these past weeks. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the windowsill. "I'm afraid," she said finally. "I know," Mavis replied. "But bravery isn't not being afraid. It's doing the thing that scares you anyway. That's easy to say when you're not the one taking the risk." "You're right, it is. But I'm taking my own risk by coming forward. Plenty of folks in town won't like me speaking against Mrs. Whitmore, even dead. I'll lose friends, maybe work, but it's worth it. Because you matter, Annabel. Your life matters. Your truth matters." Annabel turned from the window. Even with the sack on, Silas could feel her looking at him. "You really think we should do this?" "I think you're the strongest person I've ever met," Silas said. "And I think you've already survived the worst thing that could happen. Going back to town telling the truth, that's nothing compared to what you've already lived through. You'll come with me. Try and stop me." She nodded once, sharp and decisive. "All right, we do it, but not today. I need time to prepare." "How much time?" Mavis asked. "A few days, maybe a week." "I can wait that long. I've got nowhere else to be." Silas stood. "You can stay here if you need. We've got space." "I appreciate that, but I've got a room in town. I'll come back in a week. Will that work?" Annabel nodded. "Yes, a week." Mavis rose, moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you, both of you. Not many people would have done what you did, buying her freedom, giving her a safe place. You're a good man, Mr. Boon." "Silas," he corrected, "and I'm nothing special." "That's where you're wrong." Mavis smiled. "But you'll figure that out eventually." She left then, riding back down the mountain the same way she'd come. Silas and Annabel stood on the porch watching until she disappeared into the trees. "Do you think she's telling the truth?" Annabel asked. "Yeah, I do." "Why?" "Because she's got nothing to gain from lying. And because I saw the way she looked at you, like she's been carrying guilt that's been crushing her. People don't fake that kind of weight." Annabel leaned against the porch rail, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know if I can do this." "You can." "How do you know?" "Because you're still standing. Because you've survived things that would have broken most people. And because—" He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "Because you're not alone anymore. You've got me. And I'm not going anywhere." She turned toward him, and he saw her hand lift slightly, like she wanted to reach for him, but didn't know if she was allowed. He caught her hand in his calloused palm against calloused palm and held on. "Thank you," she whispered. "Nothing to thank me for." "There's everything to thank you for." They stood like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the mountain wind moving through the pines above them. Then Annabel gently pulled away and went back inside. The week that followed was strange, tense. They went through the motions of their daily routine, cutting timber, cooking meals, sitting by the fire, but underneath it all ran a current of anticipation that made everything feel fragile. Annabel grew quieter, more withdrawn. She spent hours standing at the edge of the clearing, staring down toward town, like she could see her future waiting there. On the fourth day, Silas found her sitting under the tall pine near the creek, arms wrapped around her knees, rocking slightly. "You all right?" he asked, settling beside her. "No." "Want to talk about it? I keep thinking about going back there, to that town, those people, the ones who watched them put this sack on my head and did nothing, the ones who called me a murderer and didn't care if it was true. I have to face them again, Silas. I have to walk past them knowing they wanted me dead or disappeared, and I have to pretend I'm not terrified." "You don't have to pretend anything. Don't I? If I show them I'm afraid, they win. If I let them see how much they hurt me, they win. So I have to be strong, have to be brave, have to be—" Her voice broke. "I'm so tired of having to be anything." Silas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and rested his hand on her shoulder. She leaned into the touch, like she was starving for it. "You don't have to be anything except yourself," he said quietly. "Not for them, not for anyone. You survived. That's enough. That's everything." "It doesn't feel like enough." "I know, but it is." They sat in silence, his hand on her shoulder, her head bowed, the creek running cold and clear beside them. After a while, Annabel spoke again. "Will you do something for me? Anything. Will you—" She stopped, started over. "I want to take the sack off, before we go to town. I want to take it off here where it's safe. But I can't do it alone. I need someone to see me first, to tell me it's all right." Silas's throat went tight. "You sure?" "No, but I'm going to do it anyway." "When?" "Now, before I lose my nerve." His heart hammered against his ribs. "All right. I'm ready when you are." She stood, and he stood with her. She turned to face him, hands coming up to the sack, trembling so hard he could see it from where he stood. "Annabel," he said gently, "whatever's under there, whatever you think I'm going to see, it won't change how I feel about you. You understand that? How do you feel about me?" The question hung between them, weighted with everything they'd been dancing around for weeks. "Like you're the bravest person I've ever known," Silas said. "Like I'd fight the whole world to keep you safe. Like—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Like maybe Sarah was right when she used to say I had a gift for finding broken things. But you're not broken, Annabel. You're just bent, and bent things can straighten out with time and care." "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know, but I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." She took a deep breath, then another. Her hands gripped the bottom edge of the sack. She pulled. The burlap slid up over her chin, her mouth, her nose, her eyes. She pulled it off completely and let it fall to the ground. For the first time in months, Annabel Crowe's face touched open air. Silas looked at her. She was beautiful. Not in spite of the scar that ran from her left temple down to her jaw, jagged and pale against her skin. Not because of it either. Just beautiful in the way that real things are beautiful, human and imperfect, and absolutely devastatingly real. Her eyes were gray-green, rimmed with red from crying. Her hair was dark brown, cropped short and uneven, where she'd cut it herself. Her face was thin from hunger and stress. Cheekbones, sharp mouth pressed into a line that expected judgment. "Say something," she whispered. Silas stepped closer, reached up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and touched the edge of the scar with gentle fingers. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For trusting me enough to let me see you." Her eyes filled with tears. You don't think it's horrible. I think it's proof you survived something that tried to kill you. I think it's beautiful." "Liars never were good at it, Silas Boon." "Good thing I'm not lying then." A sob broke from her chest, raw and relieved, and full of something that might have been hope. Silas pulled her into his arms, held her while she cried against his shoulder, felt her shake with the force of finally letting go. "You're all right," he murmured into her hair. "You're all right. I've got you." Don't let go. Never. They stood like that until the tears slowed, until her breathing steadied, until she pulled back just enough to look up at him. I want to go to town, she said. I want to face them. I want to tell the truth and clear my name and stop being afraid. Then that's what we'll do. And after? After what? After I'm not a wanted woman anymore. After my name is clear. What happens then? Silas looked at her, at this woman who'd saved his life, and let him save hers, who'd learned to swing an axe and face her demons and trust again, despite every reason not to. Then we figure out what comes next, he said. Together, if you want. I want, she said softly. God help me, I want. He smiled, the first real smile he'd worn since Sarah died. Then it settled. 3 days later, Mavis returned as promised. Annabel met Mavis at the door without the sack. The older woman's eyes went wide, then soft, and she reached out to touch Annabel's face with trembling fingers. There you are, Mavis whispered. There's the girl I remember. I'm not a girl anymore. No, you're a woman who's been through hell and came out the other side. Mavis's voice was fierce. And you're going to walk into that town and show them exactly what they tried to break. You ready? Annabel glanced back at Silas, who stood in the doorway with his rifle slung over his shoulder and his jaw set. He nodded once. I'm ready, she said. They rode down the mountain together, 3 horses moving single file along the narrow trail. Silas led Annabel in the middle, Mavis bringing up the rear. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were hoofbeats and leather creaking, and the wind moving through the pines like a held breath finally released. As they descended, the forest thinned and the air grew warmer. By the time they reached the valley floor, Annabel could see timber falls ahead, a collection of buildings huddled around a main street, smoke rising from chimneys, people moving like ants between the general store and the saloon. Her hands tightened on the reins. Silas looked back, caught her eye, and slowed his horse until they were riding side by side. You want to turn back, say the word, he said quietly. No shame in it. I'm not turning back. Didn't think so, but I needed you to know you could. They entered town at noon when the sun was high and the street was busy. Heads turned as they passed. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A woman clutched her child closer. A man spat on the ground and muttered something Annabel couldn't hear, but could guess at. She kept her eyes forward, chin up, hands steady on the reins, even though everything in her screamed to run. Beside her, Silas rode like a sentinel, and behind them, Mavis hummed something low and steady that might have been a hymn, or might have been a warning. They stopped in front of the sheriff's office. Silas dismounted, first tied his horse, then moved to help Annabel down. His hands were steady on her waist, his eyes locked on hers. I'm right here, he said. Every step. I know. Mavis joined them on the wooden walkway. Sheriff Tucker's a reasonable man, hard but fair. He'll listen. And if he doesn't, then we make him listen. The sheriff's office was dim and smelled like old coffee and tobacco. Behind a scarred wooden desk sat a man in his 50s, gray-haired and thick around the middle, with eyes that had seen too much and believed too little. He looked up when they entered, took in Annabel's face, and his expression went carefully neutral. Miss Crowe, he said. Didn't expect to see you again. I didn't expect to come back. Yet here you are. His gaze shifted to Silas. And you are Silas Boon. I'm with her. I can see that. Tucker leaned back in his chair, making it creak. What brings you folks to my office? Mavis stepped forward and placed the folded affidavit on his desk. New evidence in the Whitmore case, my sworn testimony about what really happened that night. Tucker picked up the paper, read slowly, his face giving nothing away. When he finished, he set it down and looked at Mavis for a long moment. You were there, he asked. I was there. Saw the whole thing. And you're just now coming forward. Mrs. Whitmore scared me into silence, but she's dead now, and I'm not scared anymore. Convenient timing. Maybe, but it doesn't make it less true. Mavis planted her hands on the desk and leaned forward. That girl defended herself against a man who tried to force himself on her. She pushed him away, and he fell. It was an accident. Self-defense. Not murder. And you know as well as I do that the only reason she got sold at auction was because Mrs. Whitmore had money and Annabel didn't. Tucker's jaw tightened. Watch your tone, Mavis. I'll watch my tone when you start doing your job right. The air in the room went taut. Silas's hand moved closer to his rifle. Annabel felt her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Finally, Tucker sighed and rubbed his face. I never liked how that case went down. Never sat right with me. But my hands were tied. Mrs. Whitmore had the town council in her pocket, and without witnesses— You have a witness now, Mavis interrupted. You have me, and you have a chance to make this right. Tucker looked at Annabel. Really looked at her like he was seeing her as a person instead of a problem for the first time. You've been living up on the mountain, he asked. Yes, sir. With him. He nodded toward Silas. Yes, sir. He treating you decent? Better than decent. You want to press charges against Mrs. Whitmore's estate against anyone? Annabel blinked, surprised. No. I just want my name cleared. I want people to know I'm not a murderer. Tucker nodded slowly. All right. I'll reopen the case. Review Mavis's testimony. Talk to some other folks who worked in that house. If everything checks out the way she says, I'll issue a formal statement clearing you of all charges. How long will that take? Silas asked. A week, maybe 2. These things don't move fast. And in the meantime, Miss Crowe is free to go about her business. No charges pending, no restrictions. Tucker stood and offered his hand to Annabel. I'm sorry for what happened to you. Should have fought harder for you at the time. Annabel stared at his hand for a long moment, then shook it. His grip was firm, his eyes sincere. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when I've got that statement written and posted where everyone can see it. They left the office and stepped back into the sunlight. Annabel felt dizzy, unsteady, like the ground beneath her feet had turned to water. You all right? Silas asked, hand on her elbow. I don't know. I think so. I didn't expect him to believe us. Some men surprise you, Mavis said. Tucker's one of them. Now come on, I'm buying you both lunch to celebrate. I'm not asking. Mavis linked her arm through Annabel's. You just faced down your past and won. That deserves a proper meal. They walked to the small restaurant on the corner, a place with checkered curtains and the smell of fresh bread drifting through the door. Inside, conversations died when they entered. Every eye turned toward them. Annabel felt the weight of those stares like physical pressure pushing her back toward the door. Silas moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring. Keep walking, he murmured. Don't give them the satisfaction. They took a table in the back. Mavis ordered for all of them soup, bread, coffee. When the food came, Annabel found she couldn't eat. Her stomach was twisted too tight, her throat too closed. Try, Mavis urged gently. You need your strength. I can feel them staring. Let them stare. They're the ones who should be ashamed, not you. Across the room, 2 women whispered behind their hands. A man at the bar turned to look at Annabel, his expression cold. She forced herself to meet his gaze, to not look away, to show him she wasn't afraid, even though her hands were shaking under the table. Finally, he turned back to his drink. Annabel let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. That's it, Silas said quietly. Just like that, one moment at a time. They finished the meal in relative peace, though Annabel barely tasted any of it. When Mavis paid and they stood to leave, a woman approached their table. She was young, maybe 20, with kind eyes and a baby on her hip. Miss Crowe, she said hesitantly. Annabel tensed. Yes. I just wanted to say I worked in the Whitmore house too, after you left. And I believe you. I believe Mavis, Mr. Whitmore, he— She glanced around, lowered her voice. He tried the same with me. But I was lucky. My father came for me before anything happened. I'm sorry I didn't speak up before. I was scared. I understand, Annabel said softly. Being scared is human. You're very brave, coming back here, facing everyone. The young woman shifted the baby to her other hip. I hope the sheriff does right by you. Thank you. The woman nodded and hurried away, but her words stayed hanging in the air like a benediction. Mavis smiled. See, she said, you're not alone. More people believe you than you think. They walked back to the horses. As Silas helped Annabel mount, a commotion erupted at the far end of the street. Shouting, the thunder of hoofbeats, people scrambling out of the way. A rider came fast and hard down the main street. Horse lathered with sweat, the man on its back wearing dust like a second skin. He pulled up in front of the sheriff's office and practically fell from the saddle. Sheriff, he yelled. Sheriff Tucker! Tucker emerged, hand on his gun. What's all this noise? Cutter's coming. The name sent a ripple through the crowd. Annabel saw people exchange worried glances. Heard the word passed from mouth to mouth. Felt Silas go rigid beside her. Who's Cutter? She asked. Bounty hunter, Mavis said grimly. Mean as a snake and twice as quick. If he's coming here, somebody put a price on someone's head. Annabel's blood went cold. Me. We don't know that. It's me. Mrs. Whitmore is dead, but someone else wants me found. Someone who doesn't want the truth coming out. Silas swung into his saddle, movements sharp and controlled. We're leaving, now. Wait. Tucker jogged over to them. If Cutter's after Miss Crowe, running won't help. He's the best tracker in 3 territories. He'll find you no matter where you go. Then what do you suggest? Silas's voice was deadly calm. Let me handle it. Let me tell him the case is being reviewed, that she's under my protection pending investigation. And if he doesn't care, then we deal with it. But at least we deal with it here where I've got authority and witnesses. No, Annabel said firmly. I won't hide behind you. Won't let anyone else fight my battles. This isn't about hiding. Yes, it is, and I'm done hiding. She looked at Silas. You said I was brave. Let me prove it. Annabel, please. He held her gaze for a long moment, jaw working, then finally nodded. All right, but we do this smart. We set the terms, choose the ground. What do you have in mind? Tucker asked. Silas dismounted and led them back into the sheriff's office, away from curious ears. Inside, he spread his hands on Tucker's desk and leaned forward. When's Cutter expected? Could be today, could be tomorrow. Man doesn't exactly send advance notice. Then we use that time. We get Annabel somewhere safe but visible, somewhere she can see trouble coming, and we can control who gets close. Like where? The church, Mavis suggested. It's on high ground, good sightlines, and even Cutter won't start trouble in a house of God, not in front of the whole town. Tucker considered this. Might work. And if he does try something, we'll have plenty of witnesses to make sure he hangs for it. I don't want anyone dying for me, Annabel said. Won't be for you, Silas replied. It'll be about making sure the law means something, about making sure men like Cutter don't get to decide who's guilty and who's not. Tucker grabbed his hat. All right, let's get her to the church. Mavis, you stay with her. Boon, you and me are going to gather some men we can trust. If Cutter shows up looking for trouble, he's going to find more than he bargained for. They moved quickly. Annabel was escorted to the white church on the hill, its doors open, its interior cool and dim. The pastor, an elderly man with gentle hands and worried eyes, welcomed her without question. You're safe here, child, he said, as safe as anywhere in this world. Annabel sat in a front pew while Mavis positioned herself near the door. Through the windows, she could see Silas and Tucker moving through town, stopping to talk to men, pointing, gesturing, building an army to stand against one bounty hunter. It felt surreal, impossible, like she'd woken up in someone else's life. "You're doing good," Mavis said from the door. "Holding up better than most would." "I don't feel brave." Bravery isn't a feeling, it's a choice. And you've been choosing it every day since that sack came off. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. People came to the church to pray, saw Annabel and left quickly whispering. The pastor brought water and bread. Annabel couldn't eat but appreciated the gesture. As evening approached, Silas returned. His face was grim. "Cutter's here," he said. "Rode in 10 minutes ago. He's at the saloon now asking questions. About me. About you. What did you tell people to say? The truth. That you're here, that you're under investigation, that you're innocent." He moved to sit beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. "Tucker's talking to him now, trying to convince him to back off. And if he doesn't, then we improvise." They didn't have to wait long. Footsteps on the church steps. The door swinging open. Sheriff Tucker entered first, followed by a man who made the small space feel smaller just by existing. Cutter was tall and lean, all edges and angles, with eyes like chips of ice, and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He wore black from head to toe, 2 pistols at his hips, a knife strapped to his thigh. When he looked at Annabel, she felt stripped bare, examined, weighed, and found wanting. "That her?" he asked Tucker. "That's her. And like I told you, she's under my protection." "Under investigation," Cutter corrected. "Which means she's not cleared yet, which means the bounty stands." "There is no bounty. Mrs. Whitmore is dead." "Her son isn't. He's in Portland. Heard his mother died. Heard the girl might get off free and hired me to make sure justice gets done." Cutter pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Got it in writing. $500 to bring Annabel Crowe back to Portland to face charges." "She already faced charges here. And got sold instead of hung. That sit right with you, Sheriff, because it doesn't sit right with me." Silas stood, positioning himself between Cutter and Annabel. "She's not going anywhere." Cutter's eyes shifted to him. "And you are. The man who bought her, which makes her my responsibility." "That's so." Cutter smiled, and it was the coldest thing Annabel had ever seen. "Well, then maybe I should take you both. Double my fee." "You could try." The air went electric. Every man in the church tensed. The pastor stepped back, hands raised in supplication. "Gentlemen," he said, "this is a house of God." "Then God better pick a side," Cutter said, hand drifting toward his pistol. "Stop." Annabel's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She stood, moved around Silas despite his attempt to stop her, and faced Cutter directly. "If you're here for me, take me. But leave everyone else alone." "Annabel, no." "I mean it." She looked at Silas, eyes bright with tears she refused to shed. "I won't let anyone else get hurt because of me. Not you. Not Tucker. Not anyone." "Noble," Cutter said. "Stupid, but noble." "Maybe, but it's my choice." She turned back to him. "I'll go with you, but I want your word, your actual word, that you won't hurt anyone here, that you'll let them be." Cutter studied her for a long moment. "You got spine, girl. I'll give you that." "Is that a yes?" "It's a maybe. Depends on whether your friends here try to stop me." "They won't," Annabel said firmly, even as Silas moved to protest. "Because I'm asking them not to. Because this is my fight, not theirs." "Like hell it is," Silas growled. She turned to him, placed one hand on his chest, felt his heart hammering beneath her palm. "Please, trust me. Trust that I know what I'm doing. You don't have to sacrifice yourself." "I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm making a choice. The first real choice I've made in months. Let me have it." Something in her voice, in her eyes, made him stop. Made him see that this wasn't about fear or desperation. This was about agency. about taking control of her own story instead of letting others write it for her. He stepped back, jaw clenched so tight she thought his teeth might crack. "All right, but I'm coming with you." "No. Not asking permission. You want to make your choice, fine. This is mine. You go, I go." Cutter laughed short and sharp. "This is getting interesting." Tucker stepped forward. "Now hold on. Nobody's going anywhere until we sort this out proper. Cutter, you said you've got a warrant from Portland." "I do." "Let me see it." Cutter handed over the paper. Tucker read it carefully, lips moving, brow furrowed. Finally, he looked up. "This warrant was issued before Mrs. Whitmore died, before we reopened the case. It's not valid anymore." "Says who?" "Says me. I'm the law in this territory, and I say this case is under review, which means you've got no legal right to take her anywhere." "The Sun hired me." "The Sun doesn't have authority here. I do." Tucker handed the paper back. "You want to argue jurisdiction, we can do that in front of a judge. But until then, Miss Crowe stays in Timber Falls." Cutter's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake, Sheriff." "Maybe, but it's mine to make." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Annabel held her breath, waiting for the moment to snap, for violence to erupt. Instead, Cutter laughed again and tucked the warrant back into his coat. "All right, we'll play it your way, for now, but I'm not leaving town. I'm staying right here watching. And the minute your investigation clears her, the minute she steps outside your protection, I'm taking her. Understand? Crystal." "Good." Cutter tipped his hat to Annabel. "See you soon, Miss Crowe." He left boots echoing on the wooden floor, leaving a wake of tension behind him like smoke. Tucker let out a long breath. "Well, that could have gone worse." "Could have gone better, too," Silas muttered. "What now?" Annabel asked. "Now we wait. I finish my investigation, get your name cleared, and make sure when Cutter comes back, there's nothing he can do legally." Tucker looked at Silas. "Keep her close, keep her safe, and keep that rifle loaded." "Already planning on it." They stayed in the church until full dark, then made their way back through town to the small boarding house where Mavis had a room. She insisted Annabel and Silas take it while she slept at a friend's place. "I'll be more comfortable there anyway," she said. "And you two need privacy to figure out what comes next." The room was small but clean, with one bed and a window overlooking the street. Silas checked the lock twice, positioned a chair under the door handle, and set his rifle within easy reach. "You think he'll try something tonight?" Annabel asked. "Don't know, but I'm not taking chances." She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. The day had drained her, left her hollow and shaking. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For bringing all this trouble to your door. For making you deal with bounty hunters and sheriffs and—" "Stop." He knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "You didn't bring trouble. Trouble found you. There's a difference." "Still feels like my fault." "Feelings lie sometimes." His thumbs traced circles on her knuckles. "You did good today. Standing up to Cutter, facing the town, all of it. I'm proud of you." "I was terrified." "Being terrified and doing it anyway, that's what brave looks like." She looked down at their joined hands, calloused and rough from work, and felt something shift in her chest. "What happens after?" "After Tucker clears my name and Cutter can't touch me." "What do we do then?" "Whatever you want." "What if I don't know what I want?" "Then we figure it out together." He squeezed her hands gently. "But first we have to get through tomorrow. And the day after. One step at a time." "One step at a time," she echoed. They sat like that for a while, the room quiet around them, the town settling into uneasy sleep beyond the window. Finally, Silas stood, pulled off his boots, and settled into the chair by the door. "You take the bed," he said. "Silas." "I'm not arguing about this." She wanted to protest, wanted to tell him they could share, that she trusted him enough for that. But the words stuck in her throat, too heavy and too honest to speak aloud yet. So instead she lay down fully clothed, pulled the thin blanket over herself, and closed her eyes. Sleep came in fits and starts full of dreams, where she ran through forests that had no end, chased by faceless men with cold eyes and colder hands. She woke, gasping twice both times, finding Silas already alert, rifle in hand, watching the door. "Just dreams," she whispered the second time. "I know. Go back to sleep." "Will you—" She stopped, embarrassed. "What? Will you stay close? I sleep better when I know you're here." Something in his expression softened. "I'm not going anywhere, Annabel. I promise." She believed him, and that belief, fragile as new ice, was enough to let her finally sleep. Morning came with the smell of rain on the wind and the sound of horses moving through the street below. Annabel woke to find Silas already at the window, watching, rifle resting against his shoulder. "Cutter?" she asked, sitting up. "No, just townspeople starting their day. But he's out there somewhere." She joined him at the window, still wearing yesterday's dress, her short hair tangled from sleep. Down below, a man loaded supplies onto a wagon. Two women walked past carrying baskets. Everything looked normal, peaceful, like the threat hanging over them was invisible to everyone else. "How long do we wait?" she asked. "Tucker said a week or two. We give him that. And Cutter just sits and watches." "Seems like his plan." She touched the window glass, cool under her fingertips. "I don't want to hide in this room for 2 weeks." "Then we don't." Silas turned to look at her. "We go about our business. Show the town you're not afraid. Show Cutter he doesn't control you." "That feels dangerous." "Living's dangerous. Might as well do it on your own terms." A knock at the door made them both tense. Silas moved silently, positioning himself to the side, rifle ready. "Who is it?" "Mavis. I brought breakfast." He opened the door carefully. Mavis entered with a basket covered in cloth, smelling like fresh bread and bacon. Her eyes were tired but determined. "Couldn't sleep?" Silas asked. "Not much. Kept thinking about that vulture circling." She set the basket on the small table. "But I've got news. Tucker worked late into the night talking to people who knew the Whitmores. He's got 3 more testimonies backing up my story, including one from the doctor who examined Mr. Whitmore's body." "What did the doctor say?" Annabel asked. "That the injury was consistent with a fall, not an attack. That there was no evidence of a struggle beyond what you'd expect from someone defending themselves. Tucker thinks he can have the official statement ready by tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Annabel felt her knees go weak. "That fast?" "He's motivated. Doesn't like Cutter lurking around his town. Wants this resolved before it turns ugly." Mavis pulled out bread and cheese, started dividing it onto plates. "He wants you both at his office this afternoon. Says he's got something to show you." They ate quickly, then walked together through town in full daylight. People stared, but differently than before. Some with curiosity, others with something that might have been respect. The young woman from the restaurant waved from across the street. An old man tipped his hat. "See," Mavis said quietly. "The tide's turning." At the sheriff's office, Tucker was waiting with papers spread across his desk and a grim satisfaction on his face. "Got the statements," he said without preamble. "Got the doctor's report. Got evidence that Mrs. Whitmore coerced witnesses into lying at your trial. It's enough. More than enough." "To clear her name?" Silas asked. "To clear her name, void the sale, and issue a warrant for the arrest of anyone who tries to claim bounty on her based on the old charges." Tucker looked at Annabel. "As of tomorrow morning, when I post this officially, you're a free woman. Legally, publicly. No one can touch you." Annabel sat down hard in a chair, the weight of his words hitting her like a physical blow. "Free." "Free," Tucker confirmed. "Which brings us to the problem of Cutter." "He'll come after her anyway," Silas said. "Legal or not, he's been hired. Men like that don't walk away from money." "No, they don't. Which is why we're going to make sure he knows exactly what he's facing." Tucker pulled out another paper. I've drafted a letter to the Portland authorities explaining the situation and requesting they void the son's contract with Cutter. I've got the judge's signature. Should arrive by end of week." "That's not fast enough," Annabel said. "Cutter won't wait a week." "I know, which is why we're going to handle this the old-fashioned way." Tucker stood and moved to the gun rack on the wall, pulled down a shotgun, checked it methodically. "I'm going to have a conversation with Mr. Cutter. Make sure he understands the situation." "Let me come with you," Silas said. "No. This is official business. I go alone." Tucker looked at them both seriously. "But I want you two somewhere safe while I do this. Somewhere public with witnesses. The church again, maybe. Or the restaurant." "The restaurant," Annabel said. "I'm tired of hiding in churches." "Fair enough. Mavis, you stay with them. I'll come find you when it's done." They walked to the restaurant, took the same back table as before. The owner, a stout woman with flour on her apron, brought coffee without being asked. "On the house," she said. "For what it's worth, I never believed you killed that man on purpose. Whitmore had a reputation. Everyone knew it, but nobody wanted to say it out loud." "Thank you," Annabel managed. "Don't thank me. Thank Mavis for having the courage to speak up." She patted Mavis's shoulder and disappeared back into the kitchen. They drank coffee and waited. Minutes crawled past like hours. Through the window, Annabel could see the saloon across the street. Could see Tucker's broad form moving toward it, purposeful and unhurried. "He's going in," Silas said quietly. They watched Tucker disappear through the saloon doors. Watched the street continue its normal rhythm, oblivious to the confrontation happening inside. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. "Should we?" Annabel started. The saloon doors burst open. Cutter came out fast, Tucker right behind him, shotgun leveled at his back. They stood on the wooden walkway, clearly arguing, though the words didn't carry. "Stay here," Silas said, already moving. "Silas?" But he was gone out the door and across the street. Annabel stood, Mavis grabbing her arm. "Let him handle it," Mavis said. "I can't just sit here." "Yes, you can. Because running into the middle of that will only make it worse." Annabel watched through the window as Silas approached Tucker and Cutter. Saw Cutter turn, saw his hand drop toward his gun. Saw Silas say something that made the bounty hunter pause. "What's happening?" Annabel whispered. "Don't know, but trust your man. He's got sense enough not to get killed in broad daylight." The three men stood in tense conversation for what felt like an eternity. Then Cutter laughed that same cold, sharp sound and walked away toward the livery stable. Tucker and Silas watched him go, then turned and headed back toward the restaurant. When they entered, Silas's face was grim, but not worried. "He's leaving," he said. "Tucker convinced him the job's no good anymore. No legal grounds, no money, no point." Just like that. Annabel couldn't believe it. Not just like that. Tucker threatened to arrest him for disturbing the peace. "I told him if he touched you, I'd hunt him to the ends of the earth. And the saloon owner told him his money was no good there, as long as he was hunting an innocent woman." Silas sat down heavily. Sometimes men like Cutter just need to know the whole town's against them. Makes the math not work out in their favor. "So he's really leaving?" "He's really leaving. Tucker's going to watch him ride out personally." Annabel felt something break loose in her chest. Some knot she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. "It's over. It's over." She stood, abruptly walked to the window, pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Outside, Cutter emerged from the livery on his horse, saddlebags packed. He rode past the restaurant without looking, past the sheriff's office, past the church on the hill. And then he was gone, disappearing around the bend in the road like he'd never existed at all. "It's really over," she whispered. Mavis came to stand beside her, wrapping one thin arm around her shoulders. "You did it, honey. You faced down your past and won. We did it. All of us." "That's right. All of us." Mavis squeezed her gently. Now comes the hard part. What's the hard part? Figuring out what to do with freedom once you've got it. That night, Tucker posted the official statement on the courthouse door, and the general store window, and the church bulletin board. By morning, everyone in Timber Falls knew the truth. Annabel Crowe was innocent, always had been. The town had failed her, and some, not all, but some felt the weight of that failure. Silas and Annabel stood in front of the courthouse reading Tucker's words, made public and permanent. "How does it feel?" Silas asked. "Strange. Like I'm reading about someone else." She touched the paper, traced her name with one finger. "But good. It feels good. What do you want to do now?" She turned to look at him. Really look at him, this man who'd paid $2 for a woman in a sack and somehow seen past the burlap to the person underneath. This man who'd taught her to swing an axe and make her own choices and trust that not everyone would hurt her. "I want to go back to the mountain," she said. "I want to go home." His expression shifted, something vulnerable and hopeful flickering across his face. "Home? If you'll have me. Not as property, not as debt, but as—" She struggled for the word. "As a partner. Someone who works beside you, not for you. Someone who shares the load." "Annabel?" "I know it's asking a lot. I know we've only known each other a short time. But I've never felt safer anywhere than I do in that cabin with you. And I think—" She took a breath, steadied herself. "I think maybe you feel the same." He was quiet for a long moment, and she felt panic rise in her throat. She'd misread this, misunderstood. He'd been kind because he was a kind man, not because he wanted her to stay. Then Silas reached out and took her hand, calloused palm against calloused palm, the same gesture he'd made that first time, but different now, weighted with choice instead of circumstance. "I feel the same," he said quietly. "Have since the day you took that sack off and let me see you, maybe before." He smiled, small and genuine. "You want to come home, the door's open. Always will be." Just like that. Just like that. She felt tears prick her eyes, but didn't try to hide them. "Thank you." "Nothing to thank me for." "There's everything to thank you for." They left town the next morning with Mavis's blessing and Tucker's handshake, and the weight of the past finally lifted from Annabel's shoulders. The ride up the mountain was quiet and peaceful, the forest welcoming them back like old friends. When they reached the cabin, Annabel dismounted and stood for a moment just looking at it. The rough log walls, the stone chimney, the porch where she'd first stepped into sunlight without a sack hiding her face. "Welcome home," Silas said. "Welcome home," she repeated, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. They fell back into their rhythm over the following weeks, but different now, fuller. Annabel worked beside Silas in the forest, her axe swing strong and sure. They cooked together, ate together, sat by the fire in comfortable silence that sometimes broke into conversation and sometimes didn't need to. One evening in early June, when the days were long and warm and the creek ran clear and cold, Annabel made a decision. She went to the shelf where she'd tucked the burlap sack folded and stored like a relic of another life. She carried it outside to where Silas sat mending a harness. "I want to do something with this," she said. He looked up, saw what she held, and set his work aside. "What did you have in mind?" "I don't know. Burn it maybe. Or bury it. Something to mark the end." "Those are both good options." But nothing. It's your choice." She turned the sack over in her hands, feeling the rough weave, remembering the weight of it over her head, and the shame that had soaked into every fiber. But she also remembered the moment she'd taken it off, the moment she'd chosen to be seen. "I think I'll keep it," she said slowly. "Not to wear, but to remember. To remind myself what I survived." That makes sense? Does it? Yeah. Sometimes the hardest things we go through become the proof we needed that we're stronger than we thought. He stood and moved beside her, But if you change your mind tomorrow or next year, if you want to burn it, then that's all right too." She folded the sack carefully and tucked it under her arm. "There's something else I want to do." "What's that?" "I want to marry you." The words fell between them like stones into still water, sending ripples in every direction. Silas went very still. "Say that again," he said quietly. "I want to marry you, if you'll have me. Not because I owe you, or because I need protection, but because I—" She swallowed hard. "Because I love you. I think I've loved you since that cave 3 years ago, I just didn't know it yet. And I know this is fast, and probably crazy, but I've spent too much of my life letting other people decide my future. This is me deciding. This is me choosing you." Silas stared at her for a long moment, and she watched emotions flicker across his face too fast to name. Then he laughed, shaky and surprised, and full of something that sounded like joy. "I was planning to ask you," he said. "Been working up the courage for weeks." "You were—" "Course I was. You think I let just anyone learn to use my tools, share my cabin, steal my coffee in the morning?" He reached out and cupped her scarred cheek in his hand, gentle as prayer. "I love you, Annabel Crowe. Have since you stood on that auction block and said your name like it was a weapon instead of a surrender. So yes. Yes, I'll marry you." She laughed and cried at the same time, and when he pulled her close, she folded into him, like coming home had been the plan all along. They married in late June, under the tall pine by the creek, with Mavis and Tucker and the pastor as witnesses. Annabel wore a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric. Mavis brought up the mountain simple and clean and beautiful in its plainness. And over her head, instead of a traditional veil, she wore the burlap sack. But this time, she'd transformed it, cutting and hemming and embroidering until the rough cloth became something else entirely. White thread formed patterns of pine trees and mountains and stars. Wildflowers from the meadow were woven through the fabric. It was still recognizable as the sack that had once humiliated her, but now it was art. Now it was armor. Now it was hers. When the pastor asked if anyone objected, the forest stayed silent. When Silas lifted the veil to kiss his bride, Annabel's face was radiant and unafraid. And when they turned to face their witnesses, Mavis was crying openly. "Never thought a burlap sack could look that beautiful," she said. "Ain't the sack?" Tucker replied gruffly. "It's what she turned it into." After the ceremony, they shared a simple meal and told stories and watched the sun set over the mountains. When the guests finally left and the cabin was quiet again, Silas and Annabel stood on the porch together, watching stars emerge one by one. "You happy?" he asked. "More than I knew I could be," she answered honestly. "You?" "Yeah, I am." She leaned against him, his arm coming around her shoulders, and thought about the journey that had brought them here. The auction block, the cave, the sack, the axe, the town, the bounty hunter. Every moment of fear and pain and choice that had led to this one. "Do you think Sarah would approve?" she asked quietly. "Of us?" Silas was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, I think she would. She always said I needed someone as stubborn as me, someone who wouldn't let me disappear into these mountains and forget how to be human. I'm glad I could be that for you. You're more than that. You're everything." They stood like that until the cold drove them inside, until the fire drew them close, until sleep found them wrapped around each other in the bed they now shared. And in the morning, when dawn came soft and gray through the windows, Annabel woke first. She lay there for a moment watching Silas sleep and thought about all the versions of herself she'd been. The kitchen girl, the accused, the woman in the sack, the survivor, the axe wielder, the free woman. But this version wife-partner woman who'd chosen her own future instead of letting it be chosen for her, this was the version she wanted to be. This was the version she'd earned. She rose quietly and started the fire, put coffee on, and began making breakfast. When Silas woke, they'd eat together and then head into the forest to cut timber. They'd work side by side until the sun was high, then come home and cook dinner and sit by the fire. It was ordinary. It was simple. It was everything she'd never known she wanted until she'd found it. Years later, when travelers passed through Timber Falls and asked about the woman who lived up on the mountain with the lumberjack Mavis would tell them the story. About the auction, about the sack, about the bounty hunter and the sheriff and the truth that finally came to light. But she always ended it the same way. That girl, Mavis, would say, she took the worst thing that ever happened to her and turned it into something beautiful. Wore it as a wedding veil, can you imagine? Took shame and humiliation and fear and stitched them into grace. That's the kind of woman Annabel Boon is. The kind who doesn't run from her scars. The kind who turns them into strength. And if the travelers looked skeptical, if they couldn't imagine how a burlap sack could represent anything but cruelty, Mavis would just smile and shake her head. "You had to be there," she'd say. "You had to see her face when she lifted that veil. You had to see the way that man looked at her, not with pity, not with rescue, but with love that said, 'I see you. I see all of you, and you're exactly who I choose.'" Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the sack, or the shame, or the auction, or the past. What mattered was that Annabel Crowe had learned to choose herself. Had learned that survival wasn't just about staying alive, it was about deciding that your life was worth living well. Worth fighting for. Worth building into something that belonged to you and no one else. She'd been bought for $2 and sold into servitude, but she'd purchased her own freedom with courage. She'd worn shame like a mask, but she'd removed it on her own terms. She'd been called a murderer, but she'd proved herself a survivor. And in the end, she'd married the man who'd seen her worth from the very beginning, not because he'd saved her, but because she'd saved herself. That was the real story. That was the truth worth telling. Because in the Wild West, where justice was rough and mercy was rare, redemption didn't come from forgetting the scars. It came from learning to wear them as proof that you'd walked through fire and emerged not just alive, but transformed. Annabel and Silas Boon lived on that mountain for the rest of their days, cutting timber and raising children, and building a life from the ashes of everything they'd lost. And every year on their anniversary, Annabel would take out the burlap veil, now carefully preserved, and tell her children the story of how she'd turned her cage into her crown. "Never be ashamed of what you survived," she'd tell them. "The world will try to make you small, try to cover you up, try to sell you for less than you're worth, but you get to decide who you are. You get to take the worst things and make them beautiful. You get to choose freedom." And her children would touch the rough fabric, trace the white embroidery, and understand that strength wasn't about never being broken. It was about gathering the pieces and building something new. That was the lesson. That was the gift. That was the legacy of the woman who'd been bought for $2 and married the man who'd loved her long before he ever saw her face, because real love wasn't about surfaces or scars or the stories other people told about you. Love was about seeing someone's soul and saying, "Yes, that one. That's the one I choose, no matter what they've survived, or what they're carrying, or what the world thinks they're worth." Annabel Crowe had been worth everything. And in choosing herself, in choosing Silas, in choosing to transform her pain into power, she'd proved that the most radical act of rebellion was simply refusing to let trauma have the final word. She'd written her own ending, and it was beautiful.